Welcome to So What's It Actually About? I'm your host, Margie McKechnie, and I, along with my wide array of guests, hope to help you better understand and weather the wonderful world of actuarial science. Hello, and welcome to today's episode. I'm joined by Dr. Chris Warton, who is a lecturer and a specialist in anatomy. He lectured at the University of Cape Town for over 40 years. And he is with us today, and we'll be talking about study techniques and how the brain stores and builds memory. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Mark.
So give us a bit of background as to you, why you studied anatomy, why you're interested in it, and then we'll jump into the study techniques.
Yeah. Look, I wanted to be a particle physicist in my youth. I'm old now. But for bizarre reasons I won't go into, I ended up at medical school. And very different from particle physics. So a lot of memorization in medicine. And I found it quite frustrating that the sort of really thinking about things, I can seem to need to do a hang of a lot. But anyway, I ended up teaching anatomy, which is the most concrete didactic sort of subject and doesn't involve deep conceptualization that's beyond any average person. But in the process of teaching, I realized, people struggle. Some people find it easy, but some people battle. And one of the things that I ached with was that I could see some people, I see them in class, and they were bright people and they worked hard, but they didn't deliver the goods. And they were battling, and they'd maybe get their 53%. But I thought, actually, they were 75, and they worked themselves into the ground. But why? What's the problem? And I think there are some simple principles that really help. And people sometimes think they're stupid, and they're not stupid at all. It's just they're using an approach to things that's very inefficient. And I feel so sad about it, and we'll talk about some of those things.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was a great intro, and thank you for that. Another thing which you may not know is that Chris Warton, Dr. Chris Warton, is the father of one of my best friends, so which is also a wonderful connection for me. But let's just get into the study tips. Obviously, as young actuaries and people who are pursuing this profession, there's a lot of studying that you do. There's a lot of time that you spend at your desk. And across the different board exams, there's sort of, there's technical board exams and then there's strategic board exams. And could you speak to sort of what are good study techniques from a medical perspective, from your educational background, that everyone should consider? Obviously, there's a spectrum of people, people learn different ways. But what are the sort of like some core principles that everyone should take into consideration when approaching studying?
Yeah. Well, look, here, I'd love to do, there's a couple of things that I think are key and that are not obvious.
Yeah.
Okay. And I also didn't mention I'm a bit into neuroscience, particularly in my career. So how the brain involves itself in these things is an interest of mine. I often say when I've spoken, as I have many times to my students, undergrads, and we're talking about studying, and say the most important thing you can do is go to bed.
Yeah.
Okay. It is an illusion that you can memorize vast amounts of stuff and so on when you're really tired. And the reality, the way memory works is that if you've learned something and then you don't sleep for 24 hours, you forget it.
Sure.
There's some work done. I read a project where they taught a group of students information Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then one of the nights they kept them awake all night. And they found that it wasn't so much that they didn't learn things the next day. The stuff that they'd learned that day got deleted. And it seems the way the hippocampus works, which is indescribably complicated. But what it does is it takes what you've already learned and fixes it in your long-term memory. But it does that while you're asleep.
Yeah.
And if you don't sleep, you just don't remember it. And so the idea that I'm going to work until 2 o'clock in the morning, say,
yeah,
okay. Honestly, it doesn't work. Now, if you're the night before an exam, you've got a lot of stuff to do and so on, you can get away with it.
Yeah.
But as a policy, it is important to get as much sleep as you need, which is usually about 7 or 8 hours sleep.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, I always did very well at school and so on at the start of university. Then I felt guilty because the guys in the class were working later in the evening than I was. I used to get to bed at 9 o'clock. And I felt guilty, so I thought, I must work later. So I started working just till 11. And my marks went down.
Yeah.
And I'm certain that the sleep is critical.
Yeah.
And I read something very encouraging the other day that Albert Einstein always used to get 10 hours sleep every night. And I thought, if it's good for big LB, and you're not being lazy.
Yeah.
Sleeping is study time.
Yeah.
And as I say, it's not for a crisis, anything. You've got to pull an all-nighter to write a project or something, by all means. But it's an illusion that you can live on little sleep. And when you think you just don't remember it.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that's true about skills, but I suspect it is. The kind of skills that you're doing in actuarial science. And so I'm sure it's part of the same deal.
Yeah. I think just to highlight, or sort of maybe double click on that is, so some people are obviously night owls and some people are morning people. So when you're talking about sleep, are you talking about just the number of hours that you sleep in? Because some people would naturally stay awake until 2 because that's just how their body functions. But then you're saying, okay, if you're going to bed at 2, you should be sleeping then until 9. Is that what you're saying? It's not necessarily you have to go to bed at 9 and sleep until 5 or 6.
Everybody's different. And that's very important.
Okay.
So you can't pontificate about details. But at the end of the day, if you say, but I can live on 4 hours sleep a night. So the evidence seems to be there's very, very few people that can function well on 4 or 5 hours sleep a night. And maybe you're one of them, but maybe
statistically, it's unlikely.
And we need enough sleep, but for most people, that's at least 7 or 8 hours. For me, I function based on about 10. But for most of my life, I didn't get that. But I think I would have been better if I had. When I functioned academically at peak, I was getting 10 hours sleep a night.
Sure. And so, okay, so we've touched on sleep. What would be another principle that you would say is sort of holistic and can be applied to everyone approaching sort of very detailed and the profession that actuarial science is?
Yeah. I would say time efficiency is very important.
Okay.
And again, maybe you're naturally efficient and good on you. But I used to act sometimes when I saw people who I knew worked very hard and I could see they were really intelligent. And their marks, they would scrape a pass or were battling to pass. I think the students were 70s. Why? And then discover that the methodology they're using is enormously time inefficient.
Okay.
I'll give you an example and we'll come back to it later, but I used to lean on my students not to write a detailed set of notes because it's so time consuming.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'd find students that they'd write out all the stuff we covered in lectures. It was in the textbook manuals that I'd given them, which were clear. The pictures were all there, and yet they wanted to write it out themselves because that's the way I remember it better. And time consuming.
Yeah.
If you read a sentence, it may take you 7 seconds. If you have to write the sentence, it may take you a whole minute. Okay?
Yeah.
And in the time that you've written it, you could have read it 10 times over. And I used to say, if you must draw diagrams while you're studying, go for it, but there mustn't be tidy diagrams. Okay?
Yeah.
There mustn't be neat, meticulous ones, because you think you're learning, but you're just doing beautiful diagrams. Bless you. You write lovely diagrams.
Yeah, but it's not efficient. Yeah.
Learning anything. And so time efficiency is very important. And to think too with textbooks, I used to say to my students, big textbooks are a hazard.
Yeah.
Okay. Big textbooks are good for freaking out other people in the class because they think you know that stuff, which you don't. And they're good for killing cockroaches. But apart from that, a small book that you can really, really get your head around, and a small book written by somebody who really knows.
Yeah, because they've like made it simple. They've distilled it.
They've made it simple. They've got it clear. You study it and you go through it, and you go through it several times. But you're being time efficient.
Yeah.
And time efficiency is critical because as an examiner, I don't know how much time people spend learning.
Yeah.
All I know is what they know, the exam.
Yeah. Yeah, and whether they presented that.
Yeah. And so time efficiency for everybody, whatever you do. And if you're really time efficient, you can have a great social life also.
Yeah.
Which is important.
Yeah.
You do what you do. You want to go running or something, go for it. If you're time efficient, if you're not time efficient, your entire life is tied up doing things that, say sadly, often, they just don't deliver the goods. You can't remember.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also I think what's added to that is that because you're not seeing the results of what you're doing, there's additional level of stress that you think will start experiencing because you now think you need to put more hours in, but you're not being time efficient and there's so many hours in a day and unless you're eating bar ones every day, there's only 24 hours in a day, and so it's a very difficult thing to then handle the stress because now when you're studying, you're stressed. So that time is becoming increasingly less efficient.
Yeah. And so you're working harder and harder. I'll give you a sad example, but worked out well. Young guy I know, we were in Malawi, and a young guy staying with some friends of ours, and he had a friend who seemed a very bright guy, but he had just failed his second year exams. He was writing a SUP, and if he failed the SUP, he was out of medical school.
I'm worried.
And then he had another exam, and and we had a long chat about things. I asked him about what he was doing. He was working hard. He was working until the small hours, 2 or 3 in the morning, working flat out, working incredibly hard. And we had a long chat, and I said, first thing you must do is go to bed. Okay, you must now. He's under pressure. He's got SUPs coming up in a month or so, and I said, you've got to go to bed. Got to get enough sleep.
Yeah.
Okay. And secondly, and we've got about time efficiency and that sort of thing. And thankfully, he passed. He's now a doctor.
Sure.
But he was using a study method where you did, because you're getting poor marks, so you get less sleep because you're working harder, and the marks go down. And you say, but I spent so much time doing this, but I can't remember anything. Yeah. And I say, you spent too much time doing it, after 11 o'clock at night.
Definitely.
Yeah. And as I say, time efficiency makes a huge difference.
So, and I think also when you do have a very weighty course where you have a number of subjects and trying to sort of weigh up, I have 4 hours to work and I have 3 subjects that I need to sort of master. How am I going to go about that? Or am I going to forfeit one subject in trying to master another? I know that's something that Andrew, he was our first podcast. He said, one of the things he really wanted to know is how do you go about mastering numerous things at once? Because it just seems almost like insurmountable. And I think it's exactly what you say. Like you need to break it up into doables, and then you need to say, okay, how am I going to be time efficient with this? And then say, okay, now I need to actually move on to the next thing. Even if you haven't fully mastered something, that's an element of almost like a life skill. Yeah,
and I think sometimes having several things you've got to study is an advantage.
Yeah,
because look, different people are different. But for me, I like variety, and I get bored with the same thing over and over again. And I found, like with studying at varsity, I'll study one subject until I was bored with it, and then put it down and pick up another one and do the other one and then come back. And I think the variety helps. But the thought that, if you're in a course, the likelihood is that you've got the ability to do it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have got into actuarial science if you weren't smart, and if you weren't really smart at maths. You wouldn't have got in.
Yeah.
And the reality is, generally speaking, people go through those courses and they pass. So you think this is not doable, but kind of is doable, unless you've got a new professor who's clueless and idealist. And those happen. I had a maths lecturer like that at Varsity, which I won't go into, and he was completely clueless. But generally speaking, you do have the ability. And the guy who does better than you may not be brighter than you,